In September 2019, Park Ranger Marcus Whitfield drove his patrol vehicle down a maintenance road near Yellowstone's Shoshone Lake and vanished from the face of the earth. 5 years later, geological surveyors would pull him alive from a cave system that wasn't supposed to exist, speaking in whispers about things that lived in the dark and painting stories on stone walls in his own blood. Marcus had worked Yellowstone's backcountry for 12 years, long enough to read the park's moods like weather patterns. He knew which trails turned treacherous in September rain, which thermal features shifted overnight, and which sounds in the forest meant something had gone wrong. On the morning of September 14th, he told his supervisor he'd be conducting a routine wildlife survey near the Mirror Plateau, counting elk herds, checking trail cameras, documenting any unusual animal behavior before winter migration began. "Back by 1700, he'd said, checking his radio twice before leaving the ranger station. Elena had packed him coffee in the thermos with the dented lid, the one he'd carried on every patrol since their first year of marriage. His last radio check came at 11:47 a.m., coordinates placing him approximately 3 miles northeast of Shoshone Lake. His voice sounded normal, professional. "All clear on Sector 7, moving to thermal survey area." Then silence. When Marcus failed to report at 5 p.m., his absence triggered immediate concern. Rangers who missed check-ins without radio contact were either injured, in trouble, or dead. In Yellowstone's backcountry, the difference between those three options could be measured in hours. Supervisor Janet Morrison dispatched 2 teams before sunset, following Marcus's planned route using GPS data from his vehicle's tracking system. They found his patrol truck at 9:30 p.m., parked at the end of a narrow service road that dead-ended near a cluster of hot springs. The vehicle sat perfectly positioned, not abandoned but arranged, keys in the ignition, engine off, doors unlocked. His radio lay on the passenger seat, battery full, functioning normally. His day pack remained in the back, containing lunch Elena had made, emergency supplies he'd never touched, and the wildlife survey forms he'd come to complete. Everything suggested he'd planned to return within hours. But Marcus Whitfield had stepped out of his truck and disappeared. The initial search began at first light, expanding rapidly as the absence of obvious explanations created escalating concern. Yellowstone's search and rescue coordinator, Sarah Chen, mobilized every available resource. Ground teams spread across a 2-mile radius from Marcus's vehicle, following game trails, checking thermal features, examining every depression where a body might fall or hide. Helicopter crews flew grid patterns, thermal imaging cameras sweeping the landscape for heat signatures. Specialized tracking dogs arrived from Montana, their handlers, working the scent trail from Marcus's truck. The dogs found something within hours, a direction at least. Marcus's scent led northeast from his vehicle, following an old elk trail that wound between stands of lodgepole pine toward a series of unnamed hot springs. For the first mile, the trail seemed logical. Marcus had been conducting a survey. This route would take him past several thermal features worth documenting. But then the scent trail took a sharp turn toward an area no ranger would approach alone. The terrain beyond that turn was what locals called the broken ground, a landscape shattered by centuries of geothermal activity, where hot springs appeared overnight and solid earth could collapse without warning into scalding pools of sulfur water. The ground itself was unreliable, composed of thin mineral crust over superheated chambers. Steam vents appeared and disappeared. What looked like solid footing could give way to reveal boiling water inches below the surface. Elena arrived on the second day, driving through the night from their home in Bozeman, her face pale with exhaustion and controlled panic. She'd married a man who understood wilderness, who'd survived avalanches and bear encounters and brutal winter storms. Marcus didn't make mistakes in backcountry. He didn't take unnecessary risks. The fact that his scent trail led toward Yellowstone's most dangerous terrain made no sense. "He knows that area," she told Sarah Chen, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He's given presentations about thermal hazards. He's rescued people who've fallen into hot springs. There's no reason he'd go there alone, especially not for a routine survey." But the dogs didn't lie. Marcus's scent continued northeast, growing stronger as teams approached a cluster of thermal features locales had named the Devil's Kitchen, a maze of boiling pools, mud pots, and steam vents where the Earth's crust remained too thin and unstable for safe approach. The scent trail ended at the edge of a large hot spring, its water the color of copper oxide, surface temperature measuring 190 degrees Fahrenheit. There, snagged on a mineral outcropping at the spring's edge, searchers found Marcus's ranger jacket. The heavy canvas material had been torn, shredded by something sharp enough to slice through the reinforced fabric. Dark stains on the torn edges tested positive for human blood. Elena identified the jacket immediately, the same one Marcus had worn on their first date, when he'd taken her to see Yellowstone's sunrise from Artist Point. She'd sewn a small tear in the left pocket 3 years ago after he'd caught it on barbed wire during a rescue operation. Now that careful repair work was insignificant compared to the destruction that had removed the jacket from her husband's body. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the park's chief wildlife biologist, examined the shredded fabric under magnification. The tear patterns suggested contact with claws, long, curved marks consistent with a large predator. But the spacing was wrong for any animal documented in Yellowstone. Too wide for a mountain lion, too narrow for a grizzly bear. The cuts were also too clean, too uniform, as if made by something designed for cutting rather than evolved for killing. "I've examined fabric damaged by every predator in this ecosystem," Dr. Hayes told the search coordinator. "These marks don't match anything in our database. They're consistent with trauma caused by sharp implements, knives, perhaps, or industrial cutting tools." The blood evidence complicated the analysis further. Genetic testing confirmed the blood belonged to Marcus Whitfield, but the pattern of distribution suggested something beyond simple predation or accidental injury. The stains appeared in precise locations: collar, shoulder, sleeve, as if the jacket had been deliberately cut away from his body rather than torn during an attack. By the fourth day, over 200 personnel were involved in the search operation. The FBI dispatched a specialized wilderness team after Elena reported receiving anonymous phone calls, heavy breathing, then disconnection, always from blocked numbers. Park Service investigators began examining Marcus's recent activities for signs of conflict or threat. His colleagues described him as well-liked, professional, occasionally stubborn about safety protocols, but never reckless. The only unusual element in Marcus's recent behavior had been his interest in wildlife trafficking. For several months, he'd been documenting evidence of illegal activity in remote areas of the park. Snares set for endangered species, unusual excavation sites, tire tracks in locations where no vehicles should have accessed. He'd compiled a detailed file, photographing evidence and GPS mapping locations, though he'd shared the information only with Elena and his immediate supervisor. Marcus believed something organized was happening, Elena told investigators. Not casual poaching, but professional operations. He said the patterns suggested people who understood Yellowstone's systems well enough to exploit them systematically. Marcus's file contained photographs of sophisticated trap systems designed for live capture, evidence of excavation equipment in areas accessible only by specialized off-road vehicles, and documentation of wildlife camera tampering in strategically important locations. Most disturbing were photos of what appeared to be temporary camps, sites where people had stayed for extended periods in locations no legitimate visitor would access. These aren't random poachers, Marcus had written in his notes. This is an operation. Someone is using the park's backcountry as a base for systematic wildlife trafficking, and they understand our patrol schedules well enough to avoid detection. The search teams found 2 of the sites Marcus had documented, both recently abandoned, but bearing evidence of recent occupation. Investigators discovered vehicle tracks leading to hidden access routes, fire rings that showed repeated use, and equipment caches buried in waterproof containers. Chemical analysis of soil samples revealed traces of sedatives commonly used for animal capture, but the camps raised more questions than they answered. The level of organization suggested people with extensive knowledge of Yellowstone's geography and seasonal patterns. The equipment quality indicated significant financial resources. Most puzzling were the maps found at one site. Detailed topographical charts marking thermal features, cave entrances, and geological surveys that predated official park documentation by decades. Someone has been studying this area for a very long time, noted FBI agent David Rodriguez. These maps show features we've never cataloged officially. Either they've conducted their own extensive surveys, or they have access to geological data we don't possess. As the search entered its second week, theories multiplied. The most logical explanation remained accidental death. Marcus had approached the thermal area to investigate suspicious activity, fallen into a hot spring, and been dissolved by the superheated, chemically active water. The torn jacket could have been damaged during a struggle to escape. The unusual tear patterns might result from contact with sharp mineral deposits around the spring's edge. But Elna rejected this explanation. Marcus carried rope and emergency equipment precisely for situations like that. He's rescued people from hot springs before. He'd know how to self-rescue, and if he couldn't, he'd radio for help. The radio silence troubled investigators as well. Marcus's last transmission had been routine, showing no distress or unusual circumstances. His radio remained functional, with full battery power and clear signal strength throughout the area. Even if he'd fallen into a thermal feature, he would have had time to call for help during the approach. Helicopter teams expanded the search radius to cover the entire thermal basin, using forward-looking infrared to detect body heat and ground-penetrating radar to identify subsurface anomalies. They found nothing. The extensive cave systems known to exist throughout the region showed no signs of recent human presence. Thermal imaging revealed hot spots consistent with unknown geothermal features, but no evidence of human remains. By day 10, search and rescue coordinators began discussing the transition from active rescue to body recovery. Yellowstone's thermal features had claimed victims before, and the powerful chemical composition of the hot springs could dissolve organic material completely within days. Without remains, closure remained impossible, but the statistical likelihood of survival had dropped to essentially zero. Elena refused to accept this conclusion. She established a base camp near Marcus's abandoned vehicle, spending 18-hour days walking the search grids herself, calling his name until her voice gave out. Other rangers tried to convince her to return home, but she'd taken indefinite leave from her job as a geology instructor at Montana State University. "He's alive," she told anyone who would listen. "I can feel it. I know how that sounds, but Marcus is alive somewhere, and we're not looking in the right places." Her conviction wasn't based on denial or wishful thinking, but on inconsistencies that bothered her increasingly as days passed. Marcus's vehicle had been parked with unusual precision, perfectly aligned, positioned for quick departure. His equipment arrangement seemed deliberate rather than abandoned. Most significantly, his emergency locator beacon was missing from his gear, though Elena was certain he'd been carrying it. "Marcus never goes into backcountry without his PLB," she insisted. "It's automatic, like putting on his boots. The device isn't in his truck. It wasn't with his jacket. And the manufacturer confirms it hasn't transmitted any distress signals. So where is it?" The missing beacon suggested either that Marcus had deliberately disabled his emergency equipment, unlikely for an experienced ranger, or that someone else had removed it. Neither possibility fit the accidental death scenario investigators were beginning to favor. Dr. Hayes continued analyzing the torn jacket, growing more convinced that the damage patterns indicated human involvement rather than animal predation or thermal accident. "The cuts are too systematic," she reported. "This fabric wasn't torn during a struggle or damaged by environmental factors. Someone removed this jacket with cutting tools, deliberately and carefully." Additional evidence emerged when search dogs detected Marcus's scent at a second location, nearly a mile from the hot spring where his jacket was found. The scent trail appeared several days old, but led toward a section of the park that remained unmapped in detail due to dangerous geological conditions. Ground teams attempting to follow the trail were forced back by unstable terrain and high concentrations of hydrogen sulfide gas. "It's like the landscape itself is hiding something," reported team leader Mike Torres. "We've got scent evidence leading toward an area we can't safely access. The ground is too unstable, the gas concentrations are too high, and our technical equipment shows geological anomalies we can't explain." The anomalies included unusual seismic readings, suggesting large void spaces beneath the surface, possible cave systems, or underground chambers of unknown extent. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what appeared to be a complex network of tunnels and caverns, but access points remained unidentifiable from the surface. "We're looking at a subsurface structure that could extend for miles," reported park geologist Dr. James Patterson. "If Marcus fell into one of these systems, he could be anywhere within a vast underground network. Without knowing the entry point, searching becomes nearly impossible." Elena studied the geological surveys obsessively, comparing them with Marcus's trafficking investigation files. She noticed that several of the suspicious sites he'd documented were located directly above the newly detected cave systems. The correlation seemed too precise to be coincidental. What if the trafficking operation was using these caves? She asked investigators. What if Marcus discovered the access point and someone didn't want him reporting it? This theory gained credibility when park rangers found additional evidence of organized activity in the area. Hidden caches contained sophisticated spelunking equipment, ropes, lights, specialized climbing gear, suitable for extended underground exploration. Chemical analysis revealed traces of exotic animal sedatives and preservation chemicals, suggesting the caves had been used for storing live specimens. But the most disturbing discovery came from a motion-activated camera Marcus had placed near one of the suspicious sites. The memory card, recovered a week into the search, contained footage from the day of his disappearance. The final images, time-stamped 1:23 p.m., showed Marcus approaching the camera location. He appeared alert but cautious, moving with the deliberate care of someone aware of danger. Behind him, barely visible in the frame's edge, a second figure followed at distance. Someone in camouflage clothing, moving with equal caution but clearly tracking Marcus rather than conducting independent activity. The footage ended abruptly, as if the camera had been discovered and disabled. Enhancement revealed few details about the second figure, but their movement patterns suggested familiarity with the terrain and professional training in wilderness tracking. Marcus was being followed, Elena told investigators, her voice steady despite the implications. Someone was watching him, and they didn't want him to complete his survey. FBI analysis of the footage revealed additional details that increased concern. The mysterious figure carried what appeared to be specialized equipment, possibly tranquilizer weapons or other capture devices. Their approach route suggested extensive knowledge of the area's geography and the location of Marcus's surveillance equipment. 3 weeks into the search, with no additional evidence discovered and resources stretched beyond sustainable limits, park officials made the difficult decision to scale back active operations. Marcus Whitfield was officially listed as missing and presumed dead, though Elena refused to accept this classification. "They're giving up too easily," she told local media. "My husband didn't just disappear. Someone took him, and somewhere in those caves, Marcus is waiting for us to figure out where." The case file remained open, but active searching ceased. Elena returned to Bozeman but continued her own investigation, spending her savings on private consultants and making monthly trips to Yellowstone. She studied geology, learned cave exploration techniques, and networked with spelunking clubs throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Online communities dedicated to missing persons cases adopted Marcus's disappearance as a cause, generating hundreds of theories and amateur investigative efforts. The combination of mysterious circumstances, possible criminal activity, and the vast, unexplored cave systems beneath Yellowstone created perfect conditions for speculation and conspiracy theories. Some theorists suggested Marcus had discovered government black sites hidden in the park's underground systems. Others proposed encounters with undocumented species or secret research facilities. The most persistent theory involved organized crime, using Yellowstone's caves for activities ranging from drug manufacturing to human trafficking. Elena ignored the more outlandish speculation but remained convinced that Marcus's investigation into wildlife trafficking had led to his disappearance. She continued documenting suspicious activity in the park, often finding evidence that suggested ongoing illegal operations despite increased ranger patrols following Marcus's case. Years passed. The search for Marcus Whitfield became one of Yellowstone's enduring mysteries, referenced in books about unsolved disappearances and featured in documentary programs about missing persons in national parks. Elena's monthly pilgrimages to the park became local legend. The devoted wife who refused to accept her husband's death, walking the same trails year after year, calling his name into the wilderness. Park rangers grew accustomed to her presence, offering assistance and emotional support while privately doubting that Marcus remained alive. 5 years in Yellowstone's backcountry, particularly during winter months when temperatures dropped far below survival thresholds, made survival essentially impossible for even the most experienced outdoorsman. But Elena's conviction never wavered. She'd expanded her geological knowledge to professional levels, studying cave systems throughout the western United States and corresponding with experts in underground survival. Her research revealed that large cave networks could support human life indefinitely given adequate water sources and minimal food resources. People survived in caves for extended periods throughout human history, she argued. If Marcus found an underground water source and learned to find food, he could still be alive. We just haven't found the right entrance to reach him. Her theory gained unexpected support in October 2024, when geological surveyors conducting routine mapping near the Mirror Plateau detected unusual thermal signatures in an area that had never been surveyed in detail. The readings suggested significant underground chambers with temperature variations consistent with human habitation. Dr. Patterson, now working with a private geological consulting firm, convinced his employers to fund a more detailed investigation. The thermal anomalies are unlike anything we've documented in Yellowstone's known cave systems, he reported. Something is generating heat patterns consistent with controlled fires or other human activity. The investigation required specialized equipment and expertise in dangerous geological conditions. Patterson assembled a team of cave exploration specialists, thermal imaging experts, and search and rescue personnel. Elena insisted on joining the expedition, her years of self-taught geology making her uniquely qualified to interpret the area's complex underground systems. The team's first challenge was locating an entrance to the underground chambers. Surface surveys revealed no obvious openings, but ground-penetrating radar showed extensive void spaces beginning approximately 30 feet below ground level. The cave system appeared to extend for miles in multiple directions, with chambers large enough to support human habitation. After 2 days of intensive searching, team member Dr. Lisa Chung discovered what appeared to be a concealed entrance hidden behind a false thermal vent. The opening was barely wide enough for a single person, concealed by mineral deposits that had been carefully arranged to mimic natural formation. This entrance was deliberately hidden, Chung reported. Someone spent considerable time and effort making this access point invisible from casual observation. The mineral arrangement is too precise to be natural, but skillful enough to fool anyone not looking specifically for concealment. Elena approached the hidden entrance with 5 years of suppressed hope and terror. If Marcus was alive down there, what condition would he be in after such extended isolation? If he was dead, would finding his remains bring closure or only confirm the nightmare she'd been imagining? The descent team included Elena, Dr. Chang, and 2 experienced cave rescue specialists, equipped with thermal imaging, communication equipment, and medical supplies. They descended through the narrow fissure into a world that existed entirely separate from the Yellowstone tourists knew. The cave system was vast, complex, and obviously modified by human activity. Walls showed evidence of deliberate shaping. Water had been channeled into collection pools, and thermal vents had been arranged to provide heating and cooking areas. Most remarkably, the walls were covered with detailed paintings, created using iron oxide pigments mixed with cave water. The paintings told a story of survival, adaptation, and gradual psychological transformation. Early images showed realistic depictions of the surface world, trees, animals, the Yellowstone landscape Marcus had known as a ranger. Later paintings became increasingly abstract, focusing on underground ecosystems, thermal patterns, and creatures that existed only in perpetual darkness. Elena recognized Marcus's artistic style immediately. He'd always sketched wildlife during their hiking trips, capturing details with the precision of someone who understood animal behavior intimately. These cave paintings showed the same observational skills applied to an entirely different environment. "He's been documenting his experience," she whispered, studying paintings that showed the cave system's layout, water sources, and food resources. Marcus has been keeping records the only way he could. The paintings revealed Marcus's adaptation to underground life over what appeared to be years of residency. He'd learned to cultivate edible fungi using organic material from the surface, developed tools from mineral deposits, and established multiple camps throughout the cave system's accessible areas. But the paintings also showed concerning psychological changes. Later artwork depicted fragmented perception of time, increasing identification with cave ecosystems rather than human civilization, and what appeared to be hallucinations or visions involving underground entities. Following the painted trail deeper into the cave system, the rescue team encountered evidence of recent human activity, fresh water collections, recently tended fungal gardens, and warm ashes in carefully constructed fire pits. The thermal signatures that had led them here were growing stronger, suggesting they were approaching an active habitation site. Elena's voice echoed through the chambers as she called Marcus's name. 5 years of grief and hope condensed into desperate shouts that reverberated through passages carved by geological forces beyond human comprehension. Somewhere in this underground wilderness, her husband had learned to survive in conditions that would have killed most people within weeks. The response, when it came, was almost too soft to hear, a whispered reply that seemed to emerge from the stone itself, carrying Marcus's voice, but changed by years of speaking only to darkness. "Elena?" The word drifted through the cave system like an echo of memory, so quiet that Elena wondered initially if she'd imagined it. Then, stronger but still cautious, as if the speaker feared that voices might be dangerous. "Is someone there?" The team followed the voice through passages that narrowed and widened like breathing, their headlamps cutting through darkness that had been Marcus's entire world for 5 years. Elena's hands trembled as she navigated around limestone formations that seemed to shift in the moving light, each step bringing her closer to an answer she'd both dreamed of and dreaded. They found him in what he'd transformed into a living space, a natural chamber roughly the size of a studio apartment, with a ceiling high enough to stand upright. Thermal vents provided warmth, and he'd channeled an underground stream into a pool for drinking water. The walls were covered with intricate paintings that documented not just his survival, but his gradual transformation from surface dweller to something else entirely. Marcus Whitfield sat beside a small fire built in a ring of carefully arranged stones, his back to the entrance. Elena would have recognized his posture anywhere, the way he held his shoulders when deep in thought, the tilt of his head when listening to something others might miss. But everything else had changed. His hair had grown past his shoulders, streaked with gray that hadn't existed 5 years earlier. His ranger uniform had been replaced by clothing he'd fashioned from cave materials. Leather-like fungal material he'd learned to cure. Plant fibers woven into rough cloth. His skin had taken on the pale, almost translucent quality of someone who'd lived without sunlight for years. But most striking were his eyes. They'd adapted to perpetual darkness, pupils dilated to catch every photon, giving him the wide, light-sensitive gaze of a nocturnal creature. When the rescue team's headlamps hit his face, he flinched and raised a hand to shield himself from illumination that would have seemed dim on the surface. "Turn off the lights," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "They hurt." Elena switched off her headlamp immediately, the others following suit. In the gentle glow from Marcus's fire, she could see him properly for the first time. He was thinner than she remembered, but not malnourished. His movements had the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned to conserve energy and avoid unnecessary noise. "Marcus?" Elena's voice broke on his name. He turned toward her then, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes, but also confusion, as if he was struggling to remember why she would be here, in his place. "Elena." He spoke her name, like he was testing its weight, remembering how it felt in his mouth. "You're real." She wanted to run to him, to collapse into his arms, and sob 5 years of grief and relief. But something in his posture held her back. Marcus was watching them all with the alert caution of a wild animal, evaluating potential threats. This was not the reunion she'd imagined. "We've been looking for you," she said instead. "For 5 years, Marcus. I never stopped looking." He nodded slowly, as if this information was interesting but not particularly relevant. "Time moves differently here. I stopped counting after the first winter." Dr. Chang spoke carefully, her voice professional and non-threatening. "Marcus, I'm Dr. Chang with the Geological Survey Team. We're here to help you. Can you tell us what happened? How you came to be down here?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring into his fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the rhythm of someone who'd grown accustomed to talking to himself. "They were using the caves, the people I was tracking, not for storage like I thought, but as a base, manufacturing something down here, using the thermal vents and the isolation." He gestured toward a passage leading deeper into the system. "I followed them too far. Got careless. They caught me." Elena felt cold, despite the thermal warmth. "Who caught you, Marcus? What people?" "Professional operation, government contractors maybe, or private military. They had equipment, knowledge of the park's systems." His eyes focused on something beyond the firelight. They were breeding things down here, animals that don't exist on the surface. Genetic work, I think, though I never understood the science. He stood and moved to one of his painted walls, running his fingers over images Elena now realized depicted more than artistic expression. They were documentation, detailed drawings of creatures that seemed part animal, part something else entirely. They kept me initially because I'd seen too much, planned to eliminate me once their operation finished. But the caves... Marcus paused, as if searching for words to describe something indescribable. The caves changed everything. Elena studied the paintings more carefully. The creatures Marcus had documented were unlike anything in Yellowstone's ecosystem. Elongated limbs, oversized eyes adapted for darkness, anatomical features that suggested artificial enhancement or genetic modification. "What kind of operation, Marcus?" Dr. Chang asked. "What were they doing down here?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Creating soldiers, I think. Or trying to. Animals that could survive in any environment, fight in conditions that would kill normal troops. They had laboratories deeper in the system, equipment I'd never seen before." He moved to another section of painted wall, showing what appeared to be technical diagrams, mixed with artistic representation. But the caves themselves interfered. The thermal activity, the mineral content in the water, the isolation. Their subjects began changing in ways they didn't expect. Elena felt a chill of understanding. The creatures you painted, they weren't just breeding animals, they were transforming them. And themselves, Marcus added quietly. The longer they stayed down here, the more the environment affected them. Some of them began to change physically, psychologically. They started fighting among themselves, abandoning their original mission. He returned to his fire, settling back into his previous position. Eventually, most of them left, took their equipment and specimens, and evacuated. But some stayed. They'd been changed too much to return to the surface. The implications of Marcus's story settled over the rescue team like a heavy blanket. Elena forced herself to ask the question that terrified her most. "Marcus, what about you? How much have you changed?" He looked at her directly then, and she saw the man she'd married still existed somewhere behind those adapted eyes. But she also saw something else, a wildness, an acceptance of this underground existence that went beyond mere survival. "I can see in absolute darkness now," he said, matter-of-factly. "My hearing has changed. I can identify different thermal vents by sound, navigate the passages by echolocation. I've learned to digest fungi and cave-adapted plants that would poison surface dwellers." He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "I dream in thermal patterns now instead of colors. Time feels different, not linear, but cyclical, following the rhythms of underground water and geological activity. Sometimes I forget there's a surface world at all." Elena's heart broke for the second time in 5 years, but for entirely different reasons. "Marcus, you don't have to stay down here. We can take you home. We can get you medical attention, help you readjust." "Can you?" Marcus asked, and his tone was genuinely curious, rather than challenging. "Look at me, Elena. Really look. I'm not the same person who disappeared 5 years ago. The surface world is foreign to me now. Bright lights cause pain. Normal food tastes wrong. I can't sleep without the sound of thermal vents." Dr. Chang leaned forward. These changes might be reversible with time and proper medical intervention. Marcus shook his head. "You don't understand. I don't want them reversed. This place became home. I learned to thrive here, to understand systems that exist nowhere else on Earth. Going back would be like asking someone to stop being human. Elena felt the careful control she'd maintained for 5 years beginning to crack. But I never stopped believing you were alive. I never gave up looking for you. Doesn't that mean anything? Marcus's expression softened, and for a moment she saw the man she'd married. It means everything. It's why I stayed sane during the transition. But Elena, I'm not the same person you were looking for. He stood and walked to the cave entrance they'd used, peering up the narrow passage toward the surface. That world up there, schedules and responsibilities, and artificial lights, and processed food. I can't inhabit that space anymore. It would be like forcing a deep-sea creature to live in a shallow pond. Elena followed him, desperate to make him understand. Then I'll adapt too. I've learned geology, cave exploration, survival techniques. I could learn to live down here. No. Marcus's voice was firm but gentle. You couldn't, and more importantly, you shouldn't. You belong to the surface world. You have work there, relationships, a life that matters. This place would change you in ways you can't imagine, and I won't be responsible for that transformation. The rescue team members exchanged glances, recognizing they were witnessing something far more complex than a typical cave rescue. Elena was crying now. 5 years of suppressed grief, finally finding release. I can't just leave you here, she sobbed. I can't go back to not knowing if you're alive. Marcus moved closer, carefully reaching out to touch her face. His skin felt different, tougher, more sensitive, adapted to his environment. But now you do know. I'm alive, I'm safe, and I've found a purpose here. Isn't that what you wanted to discover? Elena leaned into his touch, memorizing the feel of his hand against her cheek. What purpose? What could possibly be worth choosing this over coming home? Marcus gestured toward the deeper passages. Some of the creatures they created are still down here. The ones that were too changed to survive on the surface, but not malformed enough to die. They're intelligent, Elena. They understand they're trapped between worlds, and they're suffering. His eyes reflected firelight as he spoke with the passion she remembered from his ranger days. I've been documenting them, learning their behaviors, finding ways to ease their isolation. They're not monsters. They're victims of human experimentation, and someone needs to ensure they're not forgotten. Elena understood then that Marcus had found something in these caves, beyond mere survival. He'd discovered a mission that utilized his skills as a naturalist while serving creatures that existed nowhere else. It was a purpose that could never be fulfilled on the surface. How many of them are there? Dr. Chang asked. 17 that I've cataloged, Marcus replied. Maybe more in the deeper systems I haven't fully explored. They've formed something like a social structure, helping each other survive, sharing resources. But they're dying off gradually. Most weren't designed for long-term viability. Elena wiped her eyes, trying to process the impossible choice Marcus was presenting. And you've appointed yourself their guardian. Someone has to be, Marcus said simply. They can't survive without assistance, and they're too dangerous and unpredictable for surface containment. This is the only place they can exist, and I'm the only person who understands how to interact with them safely. Dr. Chang spoke carefully. Marcus, if these creatures are the result of illegal experimentation, there are authorities who should be notified, scientists who could help. Marcus's expression hardened. The people who created them had government connections, unlimited resources, and no ethical constraints. If they're discovered, they'll be destroyed or captured for further experimentation. I won't let that happen. Elena saw the finality in his decision and felt a new kind of grief settle over her, not for Marcus's death, but for the death of the life they'd planned together. He'd made his choice, and she understood it, even as it broke her heart. "What do you need?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "Supplies, information, resources. If you're staying here, what do you need to continue your work?" For the first time since they'd found him, Marcus smiled, the same expression Elena had fallen in love with years ago. "Medical supplies, when possible, books about animal behavior and genetics, maybe some basic tools I can't manufacture down here." Elena nodded, already making mental lists. "I can arrange that. Regular supply drops, left in specific locations where you can retrieve them safely." "Elena, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I spent 5 years looking for you because I couldn't accept not knowing. Now I know, and I have to accept your choice. But that doesn't mean I have to abandon you completely." Marcus reached for her hands, holding them gently in his transformed grip. "I never wanted you to suffer. If I could change what happened, if I could come home with you—" "I know," Elena said. "But this is who you are now, and this is where you're needed. I understand that, even if it's not what I want." The rescue team prepared to leave, documenting Marcus's location and condition for their official reports while understanding that much of what they'd learned would need to remain classified. The existence of illegal genetic experimentation in national parks, combined with the discovery of modified creatures still living in cave systems, presented complications beyond typical search and rescue protocols. Before departing, Elena spent one last hour with Marcus, listening as he explained his daily routines, his ongoing research, and his hopes for the creatures he'd chosen to protect. She memorized every detail, understanding this would have to sustain her for however long his underground mission continued. "Will you ever consider coming back to the surface?" she asked as they prepared to say goodbye. Marcus considered the question seriously. Maybe someday, when the creatures no longer need protection. But Elena, that could be years, or decades, or never. Don't wait for me. Build a life that makes you happy. Elena kissed him one final time, tasting cave minerals on his lips and feeling the changed texture of his skin. "I'll never stop loving you," she whispered. "I'll never stop loving you either," Marcus replied. "But love sometimes means letting go." The ascent to the surface felt like traveling between worlds. Elena emerged into autumn sunlight that seemed impossibly bright after the gentle darkness of Marcus's domain. The rescue team sealed the cave entrance, documenting its location for future supply missions, while ensuring casual explorers couldn't accidentally discover the underground ecosystem Marcus was protecting. Elena's official statement described finding Marcus alive, but choosing to remain in the caves due to adaptation issues that made surface return medically inadvisable. The full truth would remain classified, known only to a small group of officials who understood the implications of illegal genetic research in protected wilderness areas. 6 months later, Elena left her first supply cache in the designated location. Medical supplies, research materials, and a letter describing her new life in Montana, where she'd returned to teaching while pursuing advanced degrees in cave ecology and animal behavior. The supplies disappeared within days, replaced by a brief note, "Thank you, all well, research progressing." M. These exchanges continued regularly. Elena's way of maintaining connection with the husband who'd chosen a different kind of life. She never remarried, but she built a meaningful existence dedicated to cave conservation and supporting research into unique underground ecosystems. Sometimes driving past Yellowstone's entrance, Elena would think about the world existing beneath her feet. Thermal vents and underground streams, impossible creatures learning to survive in perpetual darkness, and Marcus documenting it all with the same dedication he'd once brought to surface wildlife. The tourists would never know that beneath their feet, a former park ranger had discovered a mission more important than the life he'd left behind. In the depths of the earth, Marcus Whitfield continued his work, no longer protecting Yellowstone's surface beauty, but guardian to creatures that existed nowhere else, witnesses to humanity's capacity for both creation and abandonment. Elena found peace in knowing he was alive, purposeful, and protecting something that mattered. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined during 5 years of searching, but it was an ending she could accept. In the darkness beneath Yellowstone, Marcus had found a different kind of light, one that illuminated the space between human and wild, surface and depth, the world we know and the worlds we create in shadow. The caves kept their secrets well, but they were no longer empty of human care. And sometimes, in the deepest part of night, Elena would dream of underground fires and painted walls, of thermal vents breathing warm air, through passages where impossible creatures learned to trust the man who'd chosen to remain with them in the darkness.